You love Dungeons & Dragons. Now, experience the ultimate way to play, D&D Beyond. Take up the mantle of Dungeon Master to add friends to your campaign. Enable content sharing so that the entire party can access your books and content. Then, after you've noted who didn't bring snacks, unleash unspeakable terrors on them using the Encounter Builder and Combat Tracker. Ah, here we go. You never bring chips, huh, Dave? You get the gelatinous cube. Classic. D&D is for everyone. D&D Beyond makes it easy.
Welcome back to D&D Beyond. I am very excited to have a special guest and also Joe, but mostly the special guest
Sarah.
that just made... Sarah, welcome to the stream. How are you today?
Very into Feywild stuff.
I should hope
Very
so.
into Feywild stuff.
Strong appeal, I think, across adorable animal species for the adventures coming soon. But that is, in fact, what we are going to be talking about today. We are in Let's Get Ready for the Wild Beyond the Witchlight mode, the adventure book that is going to be coming out on September 24th. 24th?
24th? That's how Feywild it is. You invented a new number.
Please enjoy the upcoming September. I'm committed to it now. It's September 24th every time I say this for the next several weeks. I'm actually really wildly excited for this book to come out, to get into people's hands, to see this adventure, to see how it plays out for everyone. But we have been talking a little bit about background lore. We've been talking about taking adventurers through the Feywild. We talked about subclasses that are a good match for that. And one thing that kept coming up when we were doing these conversations was people asking what sort of would be good inspirations to draw on when you're working in a setting like this and with a story like this. What kinds of books or shows or stories or art might you look at for inspiration? So I'm so excited that you could come join me because we have pulled together a list of some of our faves for that. And we are gonna take them through right now. So please be adding your own in the chat and in the comments as we go. But we have assembled sort of our top pulls, including some rather mysterious ones that I'm excited to hear about from you, Joe, as to how we can learn from them and apply them when we are running our own Wild Beyond the Witchlight Feywild adventures. So that was the preamble. How you doing, Joe?
I'm good. I'm excited about this. Look, I think already we know that Feywild is, or Wild Beyond the Witchlight, rather. I need to stop calling it the Feywild book. I sound like my dad when he's like
the Feywild.
Yeah, when I was in like middle school, like, I want Nirvana CDs, and he was like, I got you the record from those flannel boys. I'm excited about Wild Beyond the Witchlight because obviously, I almost said Lichlight, and I was like, that's a new domain of dread. Because obviously there's like a lot of cool Easter eggs and stuff that they've been hinting at, and things like that, and lots of cool nods to lore past for D&D. And there's going to be a ton of stuff to really kind of stick to and run through with like the adventure and all that stuff. But obviously part of the joy then of D&D is kind of like making things your own and finding that inspiration and getting chewed on with your cat while you're trying to make a valid point. And so I'm super excited to sort of have this list together. Plus, my old Screen Junkies universe and D&D Beyond worlds colliding, where we just make lists of things people should watch. Why not?
Well, it's truly us all just living out our nerd selves, because are we not all still the kid who is just like, I liked this book, maybe you also like this book, and we be book friends?
This is correct.
It's the fundamental impulse, really, that drives all of it. So, speaking of which, I feel like the first one that we should mention right off of the top, The Wild Beyond the Witchlight is not just an adventure into the Feywild. It begins with a very specific setting, and as you can see, from the back of the published book already has the pull quote that leads us into our very first pick of what you might want to check out to inspire your Feywild playthrough. Something Wicked This Way Comes, which was the dark fantasy 1962 novel by science fiction luminary Ray Bradbury. And many points to the folks who've been bringing that up consistently since we talked about the carnival in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft months ago, because it, of course, is a go-to in terms of stories about coming of age, in terms of dark fantasy, a big influence, as we know, on some of the folks who made the book, and for that intersection of childhood and wonder and danger and the circus, it is, for obvious reasons, the number one.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think, evil and circus, for whatever reason, go together like peanut butter and chocolate. And I think Something Wicked is definitely the standard bearer there. And when we were assembling this list, it was really funny because I was like, what's my best example of evil circus? And I started to write down Red Triangle Gang from Batman Return. And then almost as I was putting that on the list, you were like, Something Wicked This Way Comes. And I was like, we'll go with that. We'll definitely go with that. But yeah,
but I mean, that's just too.
But yeah, I mean, Bradbury's just such like a luminary and a monolith for genre jump off and inspiration anyway. So many of the things that we're going to discuss and reference, and so many things that you're going to see in Wild Beyond the Witchlight are beget of, right? So I mean, it's a fantastic kickoff.
And I love also that it reminds us sort of immediately that whenever we are dealing with the realms of folktale and fairy tale and myth and legend, we are dealing with references to references to references to references, things that reverberate down through stories and are repeated in new incarnations. That's going to be in basically every element on this list is working inside a tradition of these stories, which, emblematized, represented. I don't have words today. But a very
Who needs them?
A thing that we can observe by looking at the title of Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is itself an allusion to the classic By the Pricking of My Thumb, Something Wicked This Way Comes. So that's our number one. And speaking of riffs on older stories, Joe, what is the first one on your list?
Well, I will. You said something. I'm gonna go to a random spot on my list because what you said about folktale and tradition really kind of spoke to me. So I'm gonna go with Over the Garden Wall.
I still need to see. Okay, tell me about it.
Oh, you absolutely need to see it. So it's this. It's you'll watch it in a sitting. It's just this little mini series that Cartoon Network did a few years back, and it's just this very sweet but dark, like as all Feywild stuff needs to be, right? These brothers unknowingly sort of fall into this, splitting hairs, but Fey, for lack of a better term for it, but like a very like autumn themed Feywild that's very dangerous, but also very sweet and whimsical and folksy. And what I love about it and why I was like, I think this should go on here because it's something that I think could be fun to really inspire you for the Feywild is traditions and customs from like your hometown. Even if they don't feel like, even if your town didn't have like every June we would gather in the square, in my hometown, the marching band sold Christmas trees every Christmas, obviously, every December. That April, was like yes. That was a big tradition, it probably Thanksgiving would happen, and then the first miserable looking freezing kids from marching band would appear on the Christmas tree lot. And what I like about Over the Garden Wall is it takes these simple little traditions from where you grew up and it multiplies them by 10, by 15, by 20, by 100. Even the simple act of a group carving pumpkins and stuff like that is shot up to the nth degree. Or a festival meal gathering is just like really, really blown up. So I think you can take that inspiration of Over the Garden Wall, which you'll absolutely adore, by the way, Amy. I'm so excited for you to watch it. And I think something fun after you watch it, really kind of sit and go, okay, what are like 3 things that felt specific to my hometown, and how can I like just crank them times 100 to make them like Feywild appropriate.
I love the idea of magnifying an element to sort of like take it just further from reality. We've talked a lot about that's the nature of the Feywild, is exaggerated versions of things.
Yeah.
Heightened
exactly.
emotion, twisted versions of things. And there's room for both very light and very dark sort of interpretations there. I love what you said, because it also reminded me, I was going to mention, for folks who have Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which I mentioned earlier because of one of the domains in it, they also have a section on different types of horror. And while your Feywild game does not need to be horror, I'm not saying that. I think you might get something out of checking the section on folk horror, which is described as one of the horror genres that they sort of break down elements of, because you can borrow a lot of those from their very overlapping storytelling traditions. And you can hear just in the title, "The Wild Beyond the Witchlight," you can get some ideas of other areas of myth and folklore that might be good to draw on. All right. The next one I'm going to pull is I'm kind of cheating because the next one is a category. It's my show. I made the rules. I can break them. Ha ha ha. Watch out for rule breaking in the Feywild. The next one is essentially pool of poems and plays that are classics. There are a whole bunch of works that sort of feed into some of the modern pop culture sources that we're talking about. And they range from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream to Edmund Spenser's Fairy Queen, which is slightly before it, up through Keats doing, I don't speak French, I'm sorry, La Belle Dame sans Merci, the beautiful woman without mercy, who is one of the sort of archetypes for femme fatales, but who is a fairy who lulls you to sleep and leaves you in a wretched state, to Christina Rossetti, whose poem The Goblin Market is about temptation and kids wandering away, depending on your interpretations. There are literally centuries of these source materials to inspire you with the connection between fantasy and storytelling, with rhyme, with weird rules, with unreliable bargains that sort of feature throughout these, and which a lot of classic painters and illustrators were inspired by, of course. You can find a lot of Waterhouse paintings and other things inspired by all of those sources, but sort of clicking through that kind of family tree of literary resources can potentially inspire a lot of fun stuff for your Feywild run.
Absolutely. No, and I think that's a hell of a pull, you know, but
I made
I'll like across the board. I mean, one pick, but you know, it's interesting to me as I was putting this list together was like, what, especially playing D&D, where anything could happen, whatever, you know, like how do you make something feel specifically Feywild? Because just because something has fairies in it, I mean, your normal world in D&D probably has some fairies in it, right? So like what are those distinct feelings? And I think you know, everything that you were kind of dropping in there, you know, those origins of these stories and legends and myths and fears and warnings, you know, the unreliable bargains, mischief over evil, you know, maybe might be a good way to describe it, because there is evil in the Feywild, but I think the danger is less the big bad dragon at the end of the dungeon and more the mischief caused within this realm, that it seems like it's like laws of physics are based around.
One thing I love about it too is that, and obviously Midsummer Night's Dream could be its own several part series because it contains much and has been much alluded to. But one thing I love about it is that it encourages you to think about dangers in terms other than just straight up. It's not just these you know, villains who want to kill you and eat your arm, or you know, it's not just straight up combat danger. In Midsummer Night's Dream, it's all about trickery. Their conflicts are wanting entertainment or fighting over a favorite, or you know, interfering with the performance of a play. There's all of these other stakes that are important to these more than human characters who are sort of interfering in the lives of the ordinary mortals, and figuring out what they want and why is a little bit less straightforward than just like, well, it would like to kill you, so run.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And so I think we'll jump from Shakespeare to our modern contemporary Shakespeare, Jim Henson, for what I just think is such a great adaptation and distillation of all of those ideas, which is Labyrinth. Not all of these have to be weird B-sides that we dug up in the back of a record store somewhere. Sometimes the hits just work, And
well, I don't get a lot of credit
just...
for being like Shakespeare. Maybe you've heard of him. Not trying to pretend. I'm pulling a hipster card there.
Oh, you had some good draws in there. You take that lap. You take that lap. But
tell us about Labyrinth.
Something. Well, obviously all of those themes start to really distill into Labyrinth. The puzzles, the questions, the mischievousness, the ball rolling, the ball juggling. All key factors of the Feywild. Obviously the creatures, the riddles, the labyrinth itself. I think all Feywild should have some form of hedge maze or weird maze. I think that's just a Joe Starr rule, really. But it's something that I think a real key takeaway from Labyrinth is stakes. The Feywild has something that you absolutely need. Whether you know it or not, like whether you're aware that your little brother that you're mad that you have to babysit has been kidnapped or not, the Feywild has taken something from you, and I even if it's something weird or different, because sometimes you don't pass through into the Feywild on purpose, right? Sometimes you just walk through a weird looking grove of trees and there you are. So someone might not necessarily have been kidnapped. Maybe you've lost your voice. Maybe you've lost your moral alignment, and you need to get it back. So I think Labyrinth does such a good job of taking all of those ideas built on by all of those poets and giving us very clear stakes that the Goblin King has taken your little brother. And he's going to make sure that you learn some lessons in getting him back, which I also think is kind of interesting.
I love that very much. And of course, just sheer when you're turning for descriptions to if you need wells of imagery, obviously you can't do a whole lot better than Labyrinth and those artists. All right, so let's see. It's my turn, and unlike Joe, I didn't put mine in a neat order. So I'm gonna hop around and
Hop.
And I'm gonna cheat again. Because there is sort of another group of sources that I think we have to talk about. They may be obvious picks, but they're always worth revisiting. And it's sort of these like they're newer than the ones I talked about, but older than like what we consider pop culture now. They're sort of the dawn of pop culture works that help to crystallize and put forward these fantasy worlds into a changing world. We're talking, of course, about the collective works like Alice in Wonderland, The Wizard of Oz, and a little bit of Peter Pan. They're sort of the I'm going to broadly call them all turn of the 20th century. That is not strictly accurate, but at a wide enough scale, it's close.
You are the Fey Queen of this stream. You have altered the terms of the bargain, and you do what you want. It's fine.
And they are all stories. In fact, all three of those are stories in a genre of we can have endless discussions about different fantasy archetypes. One pattern that people noticed at different points was that there's a lot of stories about sort of boys going to other worlds and becoming king there, where there are a lot of stories about girls sort of going to other worlds, surviving a bunch of stuff, and then going back home. And whatever might be the reasons for those separate patterns, which I'm going to not let myself get distracted by, but is very interesting, we do have this body of very interesting works about little girls going to fantastical universes, dealing with what they find there, changing and being changed by these larger than life fascinating figures. And it has given us a lot of specific images and illusions that we still reuse and recycle in works to this day. So, of course, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland gives us classic nonsense writing, which is one of my favorite parts of it. When you really need some quality nonsense, Lewis Carroll is kind of your guy. And the idea that the rules work differently here. The idea that travel works differently here, size works differently here. You can't trust the food and the drink. You can't trust the being that you're talking to be what it seems to be. The trickery inherent in it, with a sense both of whimsy and danger, obviously is something that has carried down to many following works. Oz is one of those things where it has a wonderful movie and like dozens of 10 times as weird books that some of us fell deeply into as kids that are very difficult to describe because they're just weirder than you can imagine, but they're so much fun. And then, of course, like Peter Pan, I just put on the list because it's got pixie dust and it's got traveling to a fantasy world and it's got danger. So it really seems like it qualifies.
Yeah, it definitely. There's elements that fall into the umbrella, but yeah, the Oz stuff especially, and Alice in Wonderland. You know, this time honored tradition of women being forced to make sense of the senseless is a great anchor for this stuff. You know, I had on my list Return to Oz, the much weirder, darker Wizard of Oz movie with Fruza Balk. And something
Tell
I
us about
love
Return
about
to Oz. Yes.
Oh, well, Return to Oz, man, is just a nightmarish fever dream, but as all good Feywild should be. But or at least mine. But something that I love about Oz, and it's really challenging to my brain as a storyteller, because for me, everything kind of has to fit, and my creator brain is big on like, okay, well, if this, then what? So for me, it's like, okay, well, if the bad guy is a clockmaker, then, you know, then what does that infer about the world around him and stuff like that? Or if this is a world of like cobbling, you know, shoemaking or something, I don't know, like what does that infer about the adventure? But Oz does this really incredible job of, and so does Lewis Carroll, of being like, okay, well, if this is a world of shoemaking, of cobblers, well then, you know, obviously it's run by like, you know, a cat that bakes, and you're like, what? No, that what? It makes sense in the context. Like in Return to Oz, you know, that's a one-shot adventure for you. You've been trapped by a lady who doesn't have a head, so she has multiple heads that she goes to her wardrobe and puts on for different occasions. That's weird. Is the rest of that adventure head related? Absolutely not. The rest of that adventure is about you being trapped in a weird room full of miniatures, and you have to figure out which ones are your friends. Why does that room have anything to do with Head Lady? I don't know, but it works somehow. Like it's the senseless just like coming together so seamlessly, which I just think is challenging for me as a creator, but absolutely like kind of fun and mind twisty for your table.
I love that because I love what you're getting at here, which is that things that seem random to us, we appreciate as creatives being like, it's actually quite hard to think of the thing that has nothing to do with this that would bring in a level of imagination that gives it adding a third dimension to something that like doesn't necessarily follow logically from it. It's not easy to do that and to make it seem like it belongs there. So I love that you picked works where they do, I think, a very good job with that. And let's see. I think Ozma also technically belongs on our list for fairy inspiration as well.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely.
Return to Oz was your next pick. So for my next pick, I am going to sort of cheat again. I know you're very surprised. But I wanted to talk a little bit about visual artists who you might want to look to, in addition to the fact that this book, like all D&D books, will be chock full of absolutely gorgeous art. But but you can't really talk about fairy art without mentioning Brian and Wendy Froud, or Frood, possibly. Just occurred to me. I'm not actually 100% sure. Sorry to those folks, but they are like classic illustrators and creators of worlds of the imagination and the realms of fairy in those illustrations. I believe not unrelated to what you were talking about earlier with Labyrinth. And then a trio of comic book artists that I love, I believe, all of whom have worked with or I was introduced to in one source. So we'll sort of backwards that into that. But Charles Bess, P. Craig Russell, and Colleen Doran are three incredible artists who do comic book sequential art, but that's also storytelling and fantasy inspired and fairy tale inspired, and just some of the most gorgeous, evocative art that you'll ever come across. And I believe all three of those have worked heavily with Neil Gaiman, whose Sandman is my like co-pick with the visual arts. For Sandman, again, is going to bring in a lot of dark edges that you don't necessarily need or want for your Witchlight campaign unless you feel like it. But it also plays with it plays with a number of different types of fantasy over its long run. It is one of my favorite works of any kind to be made. So I just generally recommend that. It does have some dark content, so read with caution. But The Sandman, written by Neil Gaiman with a stunning array of the greatest artists who've ever lived, is a comic book series that ran from the late 80s to the mid 90s. I'm not neutral about it at all. You can tell I'm extremely biased. But it, Death here is going to back me up on that. It's a wonderful series, and there is a Midsummer Night's Dream issue of it that sort of brings together a bunch of these concerns at once to sort of talk about humanity and inhumanity and bargains and forces that are scarier for not caring what happens to us, which are all sort of really fun influences to play with, as we were talking about for the Feywild. So a bunch of artists and also Sandman. That's my pick.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad you brought up that particular story too, because I feel like there's something interesting about like an exchange of ideas, but like they're almost made manifest, if that makes sense. Like, whereas let's say Christopher Nolan, who's a fantastic filmmaker, very, very heady, very intellectual, but there's but more focused on like the ideas, whereas like Lewis Carroll, and I didn't think this stream was going to, I didn't know that my new job with D&D Beyond was going to make me try to make a weird comparison to Christopher Nolan and Lewis Carroll, but here we are. Whereas like Lewis Carroll would take those like same ideas and they would almost be like brought to life, like those parlor conversations about philosophy and stuff like that. Like imagine, whereas Nolan is exploring some sort of interesting ideas with like Interstellar and the Time One Tenet. Take those ideas that are sort of being kind of analyzed by Nolan and watch them sort of get brought to life almost at the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. Because those are just very bizarre things that would be discussed and then, happen. That would be like actually kind of made manifest. So yeah. I find that's super interesting. Those ideas of like humanity and stuff like that Sandman like really, really delves into, because those aren't just like ideas and themes necessarily in the Feywild. They're living, breathing things that your party might have to contend with in some very interesting ways.
I love that, personifying those twisty ideas. And I will say, I think like the invisible middle step between like Lewis Carroll and Christopher Nolan, for my totally made up, not officially expert money, would maybe be one of my favorite authors who I hadn't put on the list but should have, Jorge Luis Borges, the science fiction and fantasy novel or writer best known for his short stories, who is sort of a perfectionist artist of the labyrinth and the twisty idea and the like encyclopedia of the non-existent. Nobody does that better than him, and he's an inspiration on many of the folks who follow.
Who I have not read. So as you watch Over the Garden Wall, I will you give me a list and I will read. Absolutely.
Excellent. Good times, good times. All right, who's next?
I think I am. I got two more in the tank. Spirited Away would be my next one, and there's lots of Fey feeling stuff in Miyazaki, but I feel like Spirited Away is the movie that really captures the essence a lot. I mean, it is in a lot of ways his own Through the Looking Glass. The story of this little girl who is again, like we've been talking about, little girls being tossed into these weird nonsensical realms that they have to make sense of. And not only is the visual imagery beautiful, I mean, I feel like everything we've named here, you can just flip through and go like, okay, mine, and do a couple of screenshots and have a really beautiful campaign created. But those ideas of like puzzles and nonviolent solutions, Sen is someone who doesn't really have a violent bone in her body, and so navigates these potentially horrifying situations. No face, and oh man, I'm losing names. That witch is not named Sebulba. That is the evil pod racer from the Phantom Menace. This is gonna. Sorry, it's gonna kill me. Chat's probably already yelling it. But
I'll
so
pass it on
those
if they do, because
puzzles.
I'm also going blank.
Okay, thank you. The nonviolent solutions, nothing being what it seems. The stink god that comes in for the bath, turns out to be, a polluted river, I think, or a polluted stream that they're able to clean. Even Haku is a dragon, but even then, that's not all there is to Haku. And then just this idea of beauty and danger mixing, and things just being like a little off. So I think Spirited Away is a phenomenal example, especially as I think something that people are zeroing in so much for Wild Beyond the Witchlight is this idea of non-combat solutions and non-violence and stuff like that. If you're looking for ways to kind of go like, I don't know how to get through a campaign without fighting something, and I am excited to sort of try to take up the challenge of that. I think Spirited Away is a great high stakes, very like edge of your seat, very suspenseful, very tense story that's completely non-violent. So a lot of, it's mostly non-violent. There's a thing
It's
with some evil pieces of paper.
Yeah, you do not fight your way through this specific set of challenges and obstacles.
Yeah.
Chat has our back. Yubaba is the name.
Thank you, Yubaba.
The lady.
Thank you.
And I love this pick. I love that you put this on the list, especially because trips to other worlds that draw on mythology can look a lot of different ways. I've been picking from a narrow well of sources, and as deep as that well is, it is just one of many fields that you can.
But look at what they share too. Like, look at what they share though too. Like things being stolen. She gets her parents taken because her parents break a social faux pas in this fairy world that they didn't even know existed. So now she has to go on this huge quest to kind of get them back. Kind of same with Labyrinth in a way. She makes a deal without realizing that she made it, and has to kind of suffer the consequences and go on a journey as a result.
All right, so let's see. That brings us to checking my list, which I didn't put in order and should have. I have leaned heavily on the thank you the fairy sources. Obviously, we could do another full one on sort of the Witchlight side of it, the sort of images of witchcraft, which we talked about here on the channel in terms of playing hags, that there's a wide and amazing array of like things to draw on to inform your imagery and performances of those. And in fact, the boundaries between witchcraft and fairy stories and which ones fall where can be very interesting. Chat has some great things for us to mention as we go here that we'll get sort of a briefer mention of. I think I mentioned it in the past, but as I'm slowly working my way towards modern works, I will stop to mention that I continue to recommend Terry Pratchett's Lords and Ladies. Um, Terry Pratchett is, of course, the author of the Discworld novels, an enormous series of interconnected, hilarious fantasy semi-parodies, in that some of them are like, they're all parodying existing works and ideas and archetypes, but they're also fantastic stories in their own right. The Discworld books are some of my favorite things of all times, but there are a sets of novels that deal with the witches of that world, which are my particular personal favorites in the entire thing. And there is one called Lords and Ladies that deals with otherworldly, glamorous beings who cannot be trusted and are not what they seem, but in typical Pratchett style, turns that on its head, but is a great reminder to be careful about rules and bargains, and how you deal with threats from other worlds.
It's a
And
great
then
pull for this.
I also I'm just gonna start listing a few of the others because I went way over my budget for numbers of things we could mention. But as chat is apparently pointing out extensively, when we get to the last couple of decades of fantasy publishing, there's kind of a golden age of like fairy related content. You get works in modern fantasy, whether that's like modern urban fantasy or like traditional high fantasy, but written in the modern day. You get a huge range of books and series that play with this stuff. So chat's enthusiastic endorsement of the Dresden Files has to go on record as a long series of interconnected approaches to fantasy that you could theoretically draw on, that deal with some fairy mythology. I was trying to make a list of like modern things with fairies in them, and the list gets very long very quickly. Everything from True Blood, which starts with vampires and goes way past it, to, of course, Realms of the Fae in Patrick Rothfuss's Name of the Wind in that series, to the Artemis Fowl books, to Elements in Stardust, which again is coming back to Neil Gaiman.
Well, that's why making this list is so hard, right, Amy? Because like it's sort of like what we were talking about at the beginning. It's like, what's the line between my stuff has fairies in it and it feels very Feywild? It feels very Feywild. Like my stuff has Fey, feels Feywild. Like, because it's almost kind of different now. Because I've run D&D games that are just real straightforward. It feels weird calling anything fantasy straightforward, but like, just like, but real straightforward, just like hero's journey, blah, blah, blah. And people are playing fairies and stuff like that. And that did not feel particularly wild beyond the Witchlighty. So there's like this I think Dresden Files are a great pull. And like, yeah, like you're saying from the chat list, like there's little like elements to pull from all of these that there's some really, really kind of like fun stuff.
And our coworkers pulled in a couple more. Yeah, the Stardust, Carnival Row, even Fate, the Winx Saga got shouted out, taking spirit world lessons from Avatar: The Last Airbender and the Korra series in terms of inspiration for other worlds, circling back around to anime for Princess Mononoke as a sort of spirits and nature as active forces kind of reference. We got a shout out for Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, and
which actually is no big deal, but man, I wish I had a way to show you this, but I don't really. But my streaming setup again is an unfolded card table, and my book is elevated with my laptop is elevated with my copy of Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell.
So you could say it's the foundation
so well on a daily basis.
Really?
Yeah, exactly.
Upon which this is built.
No, 100%.
I in terms of drawing on just the wealth of modern fantasy gives us so many great options. If you're looking for fantasy inspiration, it's in a different vein, but I really enjoyed. I recently read Akata Witch, the first entry in the Instabidi series by Nandi Okorafor, she is a science fiction and fantasy author, but she particularly has a girl who discovers powers in herself and sort of a another world invisible to most of the people around her, full of dangers and some wonders that I love very much. And then for the circus side of it, there's a bunch of great extra sources you can draw on. Everything from our friends at Critical Role have given you some wonderful circus imagery, which I know some of you in chat will probably already be aware of. But if you don't know, I think I can safely say that you should check out the beginning of Campaign 2. For some inspiring imagery and choices. And then everything from the comics world, from the Goon to some elements of James Robinson's Starman. There's a huge range of imagery and literature that goes with all of that. Okay, so those were I think I've mostly, we're not going to get into Morgan Le Fay. That's a whole, she's sort of like a witch and a myth and a fairy. There's a whole lot going on there. But obviously there's very little that you can't pull in from mythology for this. But you had, I think, one more pick that you wanted to share with us.
Yeah, and with and hey, it's a special day. You guys get both of them. Wow. Thanks for hanging out, Stu. So this pick might seem a little obvious, especially just based on like the kind of the list that we've pulled and everything. But it struck me that if you want a series that I think encapsulates the Feywild just to a T, it's HBO's Succession, which is a story it's basically about the family that owns Fox, and they're all awful, and they're all trying to sort of take control of the company. Hear me out. Succession is just like the Feywild to me. It's about entrapment and it's about entanglement. And it's about the idea that everything is transactional. Everything in the Feywild is transactional. You take a short rest, there's a consequence. You say the wrong thing to a talking bear that you met, there's a consequence. You say the right thing to the talking bear that you met, there's a consequence. And every single moment in Succession is consequential. Everything is absolutely every moment is transactional. Absolutely everything, because these people are entangled in this world that there's truly no like proper way out of. That's something about the Feywild that I really love, is like, is there an escape? Like, is there like, do you finish the dungeon and then just go back to the inn ever, really, in the Feywild without at least being completely changed? And this is not a obvious sorry, by the way, not a fantasy show or a genre show in the slightest. It's a family drama. It's a comedy drama about horrible people, but the themes are there. Like, the themes are the same. They're trapped in a world that they can't get out of, even if they want to. The only way is up, to sort of survive this place. And absolutely everything they do, absolutely every choice they make, every choice they don't make, is a transactional thing with a consequence. And I think it feels very Fey to me. There are Fey kings, there are Fey queens. I mean, it's just, there's just different bizarre places to go and explore. I mean, kind of just like Alice in Wonderland in a lot of ways. And as you continue to get rich and decadent, like the world that these people live in, a lot of it feels as batshit as Alice in Wonderland, quite frankly, because rich people just live in a different place than we do. But I think the more I thought about it, I was like, I think Succession might be the best example of the Feywild on TV right now.
I saw this on your list and was just like, I can't wait for whatever this explanation is. But you have sold me, because I think what you're saying is, and I haven't seen the show, but I know I've heard a lot of good stuff about it. But basically, any of these characters could aspirationally be a warlock patron.
Oh yeah, completely. Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Oh God, if your warlock patron was Logan Roy, yeah, that would be. Now I kind of want to do that. Yeah, that's Brian Cox's character. Oh, he's horrifying.
He must give me a room with that's a dark bargain indeed.
Room with him. yeah. Now I got to figure out how to do that in a campaign.
Let's see. Last questions from chat. We have one from Aaron Lahr. Joe, Addams Family or Beetlejuice?
Oh,
I don't know if that's a choice or just an offering of some. I love both of those as visual inspiration.
Yeah. Oh! I thought I was having to pick one, and only one could survive, and I was very upset.
Know.
I think there are. I mean, obviously, like much darker Fey elements, but definitely Fey elements in both of them. Especially Beetlejuice with like the miniatures and the model table, I think is so cool, and just like the sort of weird. That's my favorite part of Beetlejuice is like the weird interaction between those planes of existence, sort of stacked on top of each other. And I think the Addams Family is actually a really interesting idea of what happens when the Feywild spills into the normal world, or whatever passes for the normal world in your game. Gomez Adams monologuing to the police officer that Debbie has to be arrested. Is there no justice? I have seen terror there at camp. I think is a great example of what happens when the Fey sort of spills over.
I love that. A Cup of Squid says, with the Rabbit Folk Haragon coming, pick your Talking Rabbit universe, Watership Down or Redwall. I'm a Redwall kid, and also Watership Down makes you cry forever. Not that Redwall doesn't make you cry sometimes, but so I'm gonna go Team Redwall. But it's really, you can't go one or the other here.
I will say that my very first Jaspers game was for Jaspers, this past Jaspers game week, and I got like halfway through planning a one shot that I, at the top of the paper, wrote Watership Down plus Midsummer ? And then I got about halfway through it, and I was like, I don't know if this is a good fit for Jasper's game.
A little too dark.
Stream for Jasper's. Like, yeah. So someday I'll do it somewhere, but yeah.
All right. And those are our extremely orderly numbered and definitely belonging in a list picks. For books and art and movies and other things to inspire you as you do your home campaigns of The Wild Beyond the Witchlight, which is the Feywild set adventure coming out soon, coming September 21st, which you can pre-order right now. The more I engage with it, the more excited I am for this book. I think it's going to be gorgeous. Obviously, if you've already watched all of this, you're on board, but you don't need to do any of the things we just mentioned to have a good time. This book is going to have everything you need. It's just a rabbit hole that leads to new dimensions of fun stuff that you might want to draw on or have inspire you as you go. Any more final thoughts, Joe?
I'm just excited for you to watch Over the Garden Wall now.
I've seen some of the comics. They're wonderful. I'm very excited about that pick. And would love to hear y'all's picks if you drop them in the comments under this, or, just tweet them at me, because I honestly love, in a nice way, being like, you love this. This is great. Put it on my radar. I love that. And then the next time I make a list with 700 things on it, it'll be on my list. Thank you so much. 701. Thank you, chat. And we will see you next time on D&D Beyond.
It's D&D.